Winter mornings in northern New York were brutal. The farm boy would wake before dawn, his breath visible in the frigid air, and make his way through knee-deep snow to the barn. This was Frank Winfield Woolworth's world in the 1850s, a world of endless toil on rocky farmland that barely yielded enough to survive. His father, John Woolworth, worked the soil with grim determination, but young Frank knew from an early age that he wanted something different. He wanted to sell things. At 4 years old, Frank told his parents he would become a merchant. While other children played with toys, Frank and his younger brother Charles would play store, arranging items and pretending to make sales. It was a dream that seemed impossible for a poor farm boy with almost no education. When Frank finished school at 16, he had only the most basic knowledge. No legitimate store would hire him. He applied everywhere and heard the same answer again and again. No, but Frank Woolworth was nothing if not determined. He convinced his mother to loan him money to attend a business college in Watertown, New York for 2 terms. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give him a foothold. In 1873, at age 21, he finally got his chance at a dry goods store called Augsbury & Moore. The catch was that he would work for free, no salary, not a single penny. He would have to prove himself worthy of employment. Frank accepted. For months, he worked without pay, sweeping floors, cleaning windows, and arranging merchandise. He wasn't a natural salesman. In fact, he was terrible at it. His bosses noticed this quickly and kept him away from customers. Instead, they gave him the task of dressing the store windows. This turned out to be a fortunate assignment. Frank discovered he had an eye for display, for making merchandise look appealing. He used wooden crates and colorful fabrics to create attractive window arrangements that drew people inside. One day, his employer gave him a special task. They had a table of miscellaneous items that weren't selling, merchandise gathering dust in the back. The boss told Frank to mark everything on the table at 5 cents and put it outside the store entrance. It was 1878, and this simple idea would change Frank Woolworth's life forever. The table sold out almost immediately. Customers loved the idea of fixed prices with no bargaining, and they loved the thrill of finding treasures for just 5 cents. Frank saw the future in that table. The following year, in February of 1879, he convinced his former employer to extend him credit for merchandise. He opened his first store in Utica, New York, calling it Woolworth's Great 5-Cent Store. Everything inside cost exactly 5 cents. No bargaining, no haggling, just simple prices that everyone could afford. The store seemed successful at first, but within months, it failed completely. Frank had to close the doors. Most people would have given up. Frank moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and tried again. On June 21, 1879, he opened another 5-cent store using the same sign from his failed Utica location. This time, something clicked. The location was better, the foot traffic heavier. On the first day, Frank sold $128 worth of merchandise. By evening, his shelves were nearly empty. He telegraphed his supplier that very night to duplicate the order. Within a year, he had cleared $1,500 in profit. The concept was revolutionary for its time. Before Woolworth, shopping meant standing at a counter while a clerk retrieved items from behind locked cases. Customers had to know what they wanted, ask for it, and then negotiate a price. Woolworth changed everything. He put merchandise out where people could touch it, examine it, and decide for themselves. Every item had a clear price tag. He bought directly from manufacturers in bulk, cutting out middlemen and keeping costs low. And he kept his prices fixed at 5 cents, then later added 10-cent items, creating the 5 and dime store concept that would define American retail for generations. Frank expanded slowly at first. He brought his brother Charles into the business, and together they opened more stores. By 1889, 10 years after that first success in Lancaster, Frank had 12 stores, and his sales had increased by 240%. The growth accelerated from there. By 1911, when the F.W. Woolworth Company officially incorporated, there were 586 stores across America. Frank Woolworth became one of the richest men in the country. In 1876, he had married his childhood sweetheart, Jenny Creighton, a girl from Ontario, Canada. Together they had 3 daughters, Edna, Jessie, and Helena. As his fortune grew, Frank built monuments to his success. In 1880, he purchased a 5-story French Gothic mansion on 5th Avenue and 80th Street in Manhattan, designed by the celebrated architect C.P.H. Gilbert. The house cost millions and announced to New York society that the farm boy from upstate had arrived. But the city mansion wasn't enough. Frank wanted a summer estate, a place that would rival the grandest homes on Long Island's Gold Coast, where America's wealthiest families built palatial retreats. In 1914, he purchased a property in Glen Cove that already had a mansion on it, the former Humphreys estate, built in 1902. Frank bought the property with his wife Jenny, paying a substantial sum for the 16.5-acre estate. However, Frank never liked the existing mansion. He found it inadequate for his vision. On a spring day in 1916, a fire broke out in the old house. The flames may have started in the billiards room or perhaps in the valet's quarters, nobody knows for certain, but the fire raged through the building with shocking speed, burning the mansion to the ground and destroying millions of dollars worth of valuables inside. Some have speculated over the years whether the fire was entirely accidental, given that Frank already had plans drawn up for a replacement. If you're enjoying this journey into America's Gilded Age and the hidden stories of great fortunes, please subscribe to our channel. We bring you the fascinating true histories that textbooks often overlook, the human dramas behind the headlines, and the lessons that echo through generations. What rose from those ashes would become one of the most spectacular mansions in America. Frank called it Winfield Hall, after his own middle name, which traced back to his English ancestry in Cambridgeshire. He was determined that his new palace would never suffer the fate of the first. The entire structure would be built primarily of marble. The walls would be marble, the pillars would be marble, and the grand staircase would be carved entirely from pink marble. Frank hired C.P.H. Gilbert, the same architect who had designed his Manhattan mansion, to create something extraordinary. The result was a 56-room Italian Renaissance palace covering 48,000 square feet. The main house had 12 bedrooms, 9.5 bathrooms, and 16 fireplaces. A separate clock tower building added another 15,000 square feet, housing an 18-car garage, staff residences, and office space. The estate cost $9 million to build. The marble staircase alone cost $2 million. Inside, the mansion was a monument to Frank's obsession with European grandeur, particularly the era of Napoleon Bonaparte. The entrance hall featured a carved ceiling trimmed in 14-karat gold leaf on a blue background. Marble covered every surface. The floor, the walls, the fireplace, all different hues of marble creating patterns of luxury. But amid all this elegance was something strange, something that hinted at the darkness lurking beneath the surface of this great fortune. Above the fireplace, Frank commissioned a coat of arms to be carved into the stone. It depicted him wearing an imperial plumed helmet, presenting himself as a kind of emperor of retail. But beneath his image was a carving of his wife Jenny, her face entirely covered by an iron mask, showing only the pearl necklace he had bought her after making his first million. It was a bizarre and cruel image, one that spoke volumes about their relationship, and perhaps about Frank's state of mind. By this time, Jenny was suffering from what doctors called premature senile dementia. She spent her days rocking back and forth in a white wicker chair, under constant medical supervision, her mind slipping away from reality. She was declared mentally incompetent, unable to manage her own affairs. The vibrant young woman Frank had married 4 decades earlier had become a shadow, trapped in a mind that no longer functioned properly. Frank's daughters were growing up in this world of extreme wealth and hidden dysfunction. Helena married a former district attorney in 1904. Edna married Franklin Laws Hutton, an accountant and advisor to her father, in a union that Frank initially opposed. He only warmed to the marriage when Edna gave birth to a daughter, Barbara, in 1912. Jessie, the youngest, would later marry a banker and become known for her extravagant lifestyle. But behind the marble walls and golden ceilings, tragedy was brewing. Edna's marriage to Franklin Hutton was loveless from the start. Franklin was a notorious philanderer who spent little time at home. Edna, lonely and desperate, sought comfort elsewhere, reportedly having an affair with Bud Bouvier, whose niece would one day become Jacqueline Kennedy. The situation spiraled into darkness. On May 2nd, 1917, at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, Edna Woolworth Hutton put on her loveliest lace dress. She had recently read a letter confirming yet another of her husband's mistresses. At 33 years old, with her marriage in ruins and her life feeling empty despite all the money surrounding her, Edna sat by a window in her suite and swallowed a lethal dose of poison. The substance was strychnine, a cruel way to die. The official story, as reported by the coroner's office, was that Edna died from mastoiditis, an ear infection that led to suffocation. No autopsy was performed, but the truth, widely believed by historians and biographers, was that Frank Woolworth paid off city officials to cover up his daughter's suicide. When reporters later tried to access the case files, they were told the documents had been misplaced. Those files were never found. The person who discovered Edna's body was her daughter, Barbara Hutton. The child was only 4 years old. Later accounts tried to soften this horror by claiming a maid found the body, but multiple biographies confirm it was little Barbara who walked into her mother's room at the plaza and found her dead. The psychological damage of this moment would haunt Barbara for the rest of her life. According to ghost stories that have circulated for generations, there's a legend about Winfield Hall on the night of Edna's death. Some claim that at the exact moment Edna took the poison at the Plaza Hotel, a crack appeared in the marble family crest above the fireplace at the Glen Cove mansion, splitting the image of Jenny's iron-masked face. Visitors to the mansion in later years reported hearing a woman crying in one of the rooms, a chamber decorated in the style of Marie Antoinette. Whether these stories are true, or merely the product of an overactive imagination responding to tragedy, they speak to the curse that seemed to hang over the Woolworth fortune. After Edna's death, little Barbara went to live at Winfield Hall with her grandparents. The 62-room mansion employed an army of servants, including 70 full-time gardeners who maintained the spectacular grounds, but it was a cold and lonely place for a traumatized child. Her grandmother Jenny sat in her chair, rocking endlessly, lost in dementia. Her grandfather Frank, who called her princess and tried to shower her with affection, was himself slipping into paranoia and melancholy. Frank Woolworth had built the tallest building in the world in 1913, the Woolworth Building in downtown Manhattan, a Gothic skyscraper that he called his Cathedral of Commerce. He had paid for it entirely in cash, $13.5 million in $100 bills. From his office on the 24th floor, he ran his empire of now thousands of stores. But success brought him no peace. Frank had an irrational fear of dentists, refusing to seek treatment even when his teeth caused him serious pain. In April of 1919, just 2 years after Edna's death, this fear killed him. A tooth infection spread through his system. He died suddenly at age 66, so unexpectedly that he never signed the new will he had been working on for months. All of his money, approximately $30 million, passed to Jenny under an old will written 30 years earlier when he was still a poor man. But Jenny couldn't manage the fortune. She was mentally incompetent, permanently hospitalized, and the money sat tied up for the duration of her life. When she finally died in 1924, the estate was divided 3 ways. 2/3 went to Frank's 2 surviving daughters. Helena and Jessie, the remaining third, went to Barbara Hutton, the only child of the deceased Edna. Barbara was only 12 years old when her grandmother died. Her share of the inheritance went into a trust managed by her father, Franklin Hutton. Despite his failures as a husband and father, Franklin turned out to be a brilliant investor. While the rest of the Woolworth family lost much of their wealth in the stock market crash of 1929, Franklin had the foresight to sell his holdings early. Barbara's trust actually grew. By the time she turned 21 in 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression, her inheritance had ballooned to $40 million. In today's money, that would be roughly $800 million. Barbara gave her father $5 million as a thank you gift for managing the money. Then she stepped into the spotlight as one of the richest young women in the world. The press dubbed her the poor little rich girl, a nickname that would follow her forever. Her debutante ball during the Depression was seen as grotesquely extravagant, with thousands of Americans standing in bread lines while Barbara celebrated with champagne and caviar. Her butler had once told her, when she was just 9 years old, that being the richest girl in the world only meant that someone would want to marry her for her money. He was tragically correct. Barbara married 7 times. First came Alexis Mindovani, a Georgian who claimed to be a prince but was really just a fortune hunter. The marriage lasted barely 2 years. Then came Count Kurt von Haugwitz-Hardenberg Reventlow, a Danish nobleman. This marriage produced Barbara's only child, a son named Lance, born in 1936. But the relationship quickly soured, and when they divorced in 1941, Lance stayed with his father. Barbara's third husband was Cary Grant, the famous actor. They married in 1942, but Barbara felt neglected by Grant's focus on his film career. They divorced in 1945. Notably, Cary Grant was the only one of Barbara's husbands who didn't take alimony. He left the marriage as wealthy as he entered it, making him unique among her 7 spouses. After Grant came Igor Trubetskoy, a French prince of Russian descent. That marriage lasted from 1948 to 1951. Then came Porfirio Rubirosa, a Dominican diplomat and notorious international playboy. This relationship lasted barely 2 months. Rubirosa had previously been married to another American tobacco heiress, Doris Duke, who gave him sports cars, polo ponies, and even a converted B-25 bomber in their divorce. Barbara gave him $3.5 million and another bomber. Her 6th marriage was to Gottfried von Cramm, a German tennis player and genuinely decent man. This relationship, from 1955 to 1961, seemed to offer hope, but it too fell apart. Her final marriage was to Raymond Doan Vinh, who claimed to be a Prince of Laos. That union lasted from 1964 to 1969. With each divorce, Barbara's fortune diminished. Some husbands took millions. All of them benefited from her generosity during the marriages. Barbara was pathologically generous, showering people with expensive gifts, buying palaces in multiple countries, maintaining a lifestyle of staggering excess. She built a Japanese-style palace on 300 acres in Mexico. She owned a luxurious residence in Tangier, Morocco. She kept homes in Paris, London, and California. But money couldn't buy happiness, and it certainly couldn't heal the trauma of finding her mother's body at age 4 or growing up in the cold marble halls of Winfield Hall. Barbara struggled with addiction, depression, and anorexia. She endured physical abuse in some of her marriages. The only person she seemed truly close to was her cousin Jimmy Donahue, Jesse's son, who was himself a troubled individual. In 1972, Barbara's son Lance died in a plane crash at age 36. He had built a successful career in automobile racing, becoming one of the few members of the Woolworth family to achieve something on his own merit. His death shattered Barbara. She retreated further into her hotel rooms, rarely leaving her bed, surrounded by nurses and doctors who kept her in a constant drugged haze. Meanwhile, Winfield Hall had passed through various owners after the Woolworth family moved on. It sat empty for years before being purchased in 1929 by the wife of Richard Reynolds, of the Reynolds Metal Company. In 1945, parts of the mansion were converted into research laboratories where, remarkably, Reynolds wrap aluminum foil was invented. In 1963, the estate became the Grace Downs Academy, a business school for young ladies. The beautiful women who walked its halls led to it being nicknamed Glamour Manor. In 1978, Martin Carey, brother of former New York Governor Hugh Carey, purchased Winfield Hall. Carey was a successful petroleum entrepreneur and an avid preservationist of Gilded Age mansions. He restored the property and owned it for decades, though critics argued he didn't maintain it properly. In 2015, 99 years after the first mysterious fire, another fire broke out at Winfield Hall, destroying approximately 30% of the interior and causing millions of dollars in irreplaceable damage. Like the original fire, its origins were mysterious. Barbara Hutton died on May 11, 1979 at age 66 in a Los Angeles hotel, alone in a bedroom, her world reduced to a bed and half-empty glasses of Coca-Cola. The woman who had once been worth 46 years and 7 husbands had consumed one of America's greatest fortunes. Only 10 people attended her funeral. An Egyptian tent by John Russell Pope, the architect of the Jefferson Memorial. The mausoleum was final monument to importance. Inside lie Frank, Jenny, Edna and Barbara, along with other family members, all resting together in marble silence. The townhouses that Frank Woolworth built for his 3 daughters on East 80th Street in Manhattan still stand. The middle house, built for Helena, is 35 feet wide and spans nearly 20,000 square feet across 7 floors. It features Ford-paneled library, a formal dining room with space for 50 guests and 3 kitchens. In 1990, Farberts and her husband bought it for $6 million and spent years restoring it to its original Gilded Age glory. After Lucille died in 2003, the family tried to sell the mansion for $90 million in 2011, making it briefly the most expensive townhouse in New York City. The price dropped repeatedly over the years. It was offered as a rental for $80,000 per month in 2021. Finally, in late 2025, after 14 years of price reduction, though the final sale price and buyer's identity were not disclosed, it had been listed at $49.95 million, a far cry from the original asking price. Winfield Hall in Glen Cove also struggled to find a buyer. After Martin Carey died in June 2020, his widow and daughter put the fire-damaged mansion on the market. After 20 years of bouncing on and off the market since 2002, the estate finally sold in 2022 for $8.25 million. For a property that originally cost $9 million in 1916 money, equivalent to well over $100 million today, it was a fraction of its value. The mansion had even served as a filming location for a Taylor Swift music video, giving it a brief moment of pop culture relevance before the sale. The story of the Woolworth Mansion, or other mansions, is ultimately a story about the price of the American dream. Frank Woolworth rose from absolute poverty to build one of the greatest retail empires in history. He revolutionized shopping, made life better and more affordable for millions of Americans, and created thousands of jobs. His five-and-dime stores were democratic institutions where anyone could find value regardless of their social class. But the same drive that built those stores also built palaces of marble where people felt trapped and alone. Frank covered his wife's face with an iron mask in stone, his daughter died by her own hand, and his granddaughter squandered millions trying to fill a void that money could never fill. The Woolworth fortune that began with nickels and dimes ended with Barbara Hutton's lonely death in a hotel room, with barely enough money for a modest funeral. The F.W. Woolworth Company itself eventually failed. The stores that once numbered in the thousands couldn't compete with big-box retailers like Walmart and Target. In 1997, Woolworths was replaced by Walmart as a component of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. That same year, the company closed its remaining department stores in the United States. The corporate entity changed its name to Venator Group, then finally to Foot Locker, abandoning the Woolworth name entirely. Today, the Woolworth building still stands in downtown Manhattan, no longer the tallest in the world, but still beautiful with its Gothic details and terracotta flourishes. Tourists can visit and marvel at the lobby that Frank Woolworth built, but few of them know the full story of the man who paid for it in cash, or the cascade of tragedy that followed his success. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. History isn't just about dates and facts. It's about people, their dreams, their failures, and the legacies they leave behind. The Woolworth story reminds us that great fortunes can build magnificent structures, but they can't necessarily build happy lives. Sometimes the shadow cast by success is darker than the poverty left behind.